You want to buy mine?
No, I got mine. It's in there. Looking for my book.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ARCO Forum. Tonight's program is called Dixie Rising, How the South is Influencing American Politics, and it's co-sponsored by the Institute of Politics and the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute here at Harvard. And as you know from a quick survey of American politics, sort of a superficial survey, we have a president, a vice president, a speaker of the House, a majority leader of the House, and majority whip of the House, the majority leader of the Senate, all of whom derive from the old Confederacy states. We also, the two outgoing elected chairs of the Democratic and National Republican committees, both derive from the South. So some might ask who won the battle historically in this country. But the question is whether that is, how relevant is that geography, and are there special features and characteristics to the culture and politics of the South today that influence the rest of the nation? And indeed, we have a distinguished panel of people that, with the exception of myself, have considerably direct experience in the topic. Three of our folks have been very active in politics in the South themselves, and two others are prominent journalists who have covered the South. And one of them, you will discover from his accent, has a very close affinity to the South. But with that, let me just quickly introduce who they are. As you know, we have Peter Applebaum, who has written the book that that gives rise to our topic tonight, Dixie Rising. And it has won considerable acclaim and considerable attention to the topic that we're talking about tonight. He is obviously a very prominent journalist who's given a special focus. And I'm going to briefly run through these folks, otherwise we'll spend all night on their distinguished characteristics. We're very pleased to have back with us the IOP, a former fellow at the Institute of Politics, Unita Blackwell. Unita was mayor of the first woman black mayor in Mississippi. She has led many movements in that state and indeed on an international front. And if you have not heard her speak, I'm sure you will discover the extraordinary experience and passion and commitment that she brings to the table tonight. Pleased also to have with us one of our current Institute of Politics fellows, Gaston Caperton, recently comes to us from having been a two-term governor of West Virginia. And next to him is another of our Institute of Politics fellows who comes from North Carolina, where he was served in the state legislature, where he was majority whip, previously worked on the governor's council on dealing with the control of drugs, and he had been a candidate in the Republican Party for the governor of that state. And finally, last but not least, is Curtis Wilkie, who is a distinguished journalist who has been working in New Orleans in recent years, who has covered the civil rights movement and a number of other extremely important developments and changes in the South. And so he's now, of course, with the Boston Globe here in Boston. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn it over to Peter Applebaum to kind of put forth the thesis that he has written so eloquently about.
Thanks. I'm the journalist with the wrong accent. Curtis has the right one. Yeah, my book, and in fact, I'm going to just expand this discussion a little from just politics to, my subhead is how the South is shaping American values, politics, and culture, because I think clearly you have to put all those together. But I think one of the really stunning things about American life today, to a degree that very few people really get, is the degree to which the country has come to look like the South. And as you began, you start with politics. President, vice president, House Speaker, House Majority Leader, House Majority Whip, Senate Majority Leader, all Southerners. I mean, the Republicans, without question, have their base in the South. The Democrats have not elected a president without a Southerner on the ticket since FDR. And when they finally re-elect one, it's with two Southerners on the ticket, one of whom, Clinton, I think was clearly a master at sort of taking a lot of the value issues that Southern strategists like Lee Atwater have perfected as Republican issues and taking them back for the Democrats. Look at demographics. Between 1970 and 1990, the South grew at twice the rate of the rest of the country. Between now and 2020, of the 10 states that will add the most residents, 6 are Southern. You look at really 3 decades of a drift to the right in terms of values, in terms of the resurgence of religion. Even something like, just look at country music, which I like country music, but 30 years ago, people sort of looked down upon it as this sort of redneck losers, nitwit music. And now it's sort of the music of white America. There are twice as many country radio stations as the next biggest format. And so in these ways and various others, I think the country increasingly is dominated by the South. And it has to do with a lot of things. But clearly, I think the single biggest aspect of it is the degree to which race has been nationalized from a distinctly Southern issue, and one that for many years basically shaped and often deformed the South in its politics, to a truly national issue, and one that is shaping in lots of ways deforming the nation's politics. So I might hand it over to Yanina now, but again, I'll be curious to hear what counter thoughts people have. I mean, I've been living in. I'm born in the North, but lived in the South for most of my adult life, and I've sort of become a schizophrenic at this point. I'm one of these people who sort of thinks I'm a Yankee, but has lived in the South so long that Southerners seem normal and Yankees seem weird, full of people who thought that Mike Dukakis could be elected president. So anyway.
Well, Unita, the South hasn't been the same. So why don't you, you were an extraordinary champion of change. Maybe you can give us some insight.
When it was talking about how all these people got into office and what happened, from my standpoint, in 1964, there was no Republican Party in the South. So I credited myself and all of those of us who raised the issue that we was not voting, and that blacks in the South was not a part of the political process. And when that started, everything was Democrat. And then I tell the Republicans they owe me and others of us because that we started to challenging the Democratic Party in 1964. We challenged. I think that wave started in that era when we challenged. It started to, that's not only Mississippi challenged, but Alabama and South Carolina, and they just started to move it around. And I feel that that's the root of it, is the change of the faces that came into the voting booths and was getting ready to be voters. I became, in 12 years later, after I became a mayor. And so I'm sure that we could get these other people elected, to their positions. Because we didn't have the opportunity. So the South is moving into now, there's more black elected officials in the South than in any place in the country. If you look at where all of the black mayors, because I was national president of the National Conference of Black Mayors at that time, it was 376, now it's 406 black mayors in this nation, and a lot of people don't know that. But we take up millions and millions of people that's involved, and a lot of them is from the South. You won't find the majority of those mayors is in the East or even in the West. They are in the South. I feel this book, when I looked and saw your book with the fish on one side, I like the fish, and then the flag is in the middle there, that kind of irritated us for quite some time, what that meant. It means different things to different people, and to me it means one thing, and to somebody else, and that's what we're arguing over right now in the South, is what do the flag mean, to whom? And I think that when I looked at the bottom of it, I saw on the side was Mr. Gendry. He wouldn't be there if it hadn't have been for this great change of, in the politics, because he's now a Southern Republican that is there from Georgia. And Georgia was all Democrat, and they was all white. So now, I think that when we talked about the South and the change, and I'd have to put this emphasis in, that it's black people was a great part of that massive political change in the South.
Governor Gaston.
Peter has said he was concerned because he thought he didn't know whether he was a Southerner or a Northerner. Let me tell you a little bit about West Virginia. Our southernmost city is farther south than Richmond, Virginia. And our northernmost city is farther north than Pittsburgh. Our westernmost city is farther west than Cleveland. And our easternmost city is farther east than Rochester. So you should feel very comfortable. I want to congratulate you on your book. Particularly, I enjoyed the last chapter. You all who have not read the book, it ends by a part by a Southern writer named Caldwell, who sold more books than Gone with the Wind in his book, Gods of the Laker, who saw the South as a place of poverty and saw it as a place of as a real loser area. And then he talks about Gizzard, who was an extremely popular Bubba kind of writer, who saw the South as what I would call the Bubba South. I find that many people who live in the North and other parts of the country still see the South as those two places. And I think today it is much more, as he explains in this book. There are two things I would like to talk about, because I think one of the reasons the South has had such remarkable success, although we certainly have our problems with poverty and our problems with Bubbas, but we are a part of the country that's had some very remarkable leadership. People like Bill Winter, our current president, people like Secretary Riley, were people that showed great leadership, great political leadership. And I like to talk a little bit about Mississippi, because I was very interested in its last candidate for governor who lost to a person who I don't agree with at all. And this short speech that was given in Philadelphia about 3 civil rights workers who were killed, I think is very poignant and points out the South that I think has been the political leadership of the South. And I really like that part of your book, and I'd like to just take a minute and read this. It's very short. We deeply regret what happened here 25 years ago. We wish we could undo it. We are profoundly sorry that we are gone. We wish we could bring them back. Every decent person in Philadelphia and Mississippi feels that way. Today we pay tribute to those who died. We acknowledge that dark corner of our past, but you also take pride in the present, and we are hopeful about the future. I think that hopeful about the future is a real sign of the South. I happened to have the opportunity to go to the Olympics this year. And the Olympics going to Atlanta was a long shot. It happened because one man one day woke up and said, why not Atlanta, Georgia? Got a lot of people together in the city, I think 15 originally, one of who was Andrew Young, who was really the kingpin that made that happen because of his work as head of the United Nations and his friends around the world. And I think one of the most interesting parts of that Olympics is what you quoted in your book after the bomb went off, and I'd like to just read that. I think I'm going to read it. It came on Tuesday morning, when Centennial Olympic Park reopened after the pipe bomb attack that killed one person and injured 111 others. Without a word of introduction, a lone black man walked to the middle of the huge Olympic stage. It was Wynton Marsalis, the great New Orleans trumpeter. He lifted his trumpet to his lips, and in a mighty whisper and a gentle roar, he played the old hymn, "Near My God to Thee." Just a closer walk with Thee. Precious Jesus, hear my plea. And a New Orleans jazz funeral for the world. Beyond the quiet pathos of that moment and the noisy clamor of the rest of the game was a simple truth: risen again. I think you titled your book well when you said Dixie Rising.
Thank you, Gaston. Robin, what were you?
Well, I'm trying to think of how to fit in with the eloquent introductions that I've heard so far. Interestingly, something you may not know about me, I ran for the city council back in the late 70s. And back then, the elections were tallied on blackboards. And I was a Democrat then. All the returns came in except the black precincts in Concord. And it was neck and neck. This was the first time that a woman had run for a city election. And she was white, a great candidate. And I think she may have been a few votes ahead. Well, as those votes came in a couple hours later, I swept the black voting precincts. And that's a strong memory in my mind. Number one, the waiting, of course, made it much more accentuated. But the reason I bring that up to you now is what the mayor said. Now there is a choice for black people or anybody that's looking to shop around. I was raised in North Carolina where the two-party system all took place within the Democrat Party. And I think it's good that that change has taken place. I think great leadership has occurred, certainly in the past, by conservative Democrats, Democrats that weren't so conservative. As I read the book, Peter, I was struck by the schizophrenia that you mentioned. You and I went to Duke. Governor Cabron went to North Carolina. That's unfortunate.
It was a good game Saturday.
Well, now what I was going to say,
And
the fact that we went,
and the mayor came to Boston, as I recall.
the fact that we went to Duke, and we were in Chapel Hill for this game, and everywhere I saw references to the fact if you went to Duke, you must be from New Jersey. So that's, again, a part of the tension that exists in the South between who we are and what we're trying to be. And I couldn't tell from reading the book, which I enjoyed very much, the fact that you're in the South now and have lived there a long time, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
That's a long discussion.
That's another discussion. But coming back to the focus of what the book was about, and I think Gaston put a real interesting finger on it. The musical selections that were played at that funeral, very appropriate. The faith of the South, the community of faith, forget denominations and other things. Community of faith draws strength together. People have rallied around that. And the interesting part in the book that I particularly enjoyed was your comments about Elvis, that Elvis is not dead yet, and what that says about the South. He even likened Elvis's rise to Christ rising. But these tensions, in a way, exist. But for those of us, and I've heard it in the discussion tonight, who have always lived in the South, feel like that there's certainly things in our past that we're neither proud of nor want to continue. But at the same time, we see a lot of strength come from leadership that Gaston has alluded to. We see it from the willingness and desire of people to get involved in the political process. I've heard a lot lately about how the gap between the haves and the have-nots is getting bigger, and it is. But the gap between people and their government is growing even faster. And the things that Unita has talked about and some of the things that I have seen happening in the South with a real two-party system is energizing people to get involved in politics, to find out what they believe, why they believe it, pick those candidates, regardless of color and party, that represent the ideals, the integrity, and the honesty that they're looking for. the things that will bring public trust back to government. So I think the South is playing a major role in that. I think it's an important role. I think we'll continue to wrestle with the things that are bad about our history, but I think as we use them to make sure that we don't repeat them, it's something to build a strong base, a way not to just find common ground on issues that we can agree on, but solid ground where people of either party, liberal or conservative, whatever the case may be, can really make a sincere and honest effort to meet the challenges and the opportunities that we have by being in this great free country. And I see that struggle going on in the South, and I think by being involved in politics and by having the opportunity to be here and have the exchange of ideas that we have in classes and in conversations with you, we build on our ability to communicate. Our relationships are able to grow, and that's where solutions come from.
Curtis Wilkie.
I have been the House Southerner for the Boston Globe for 22 years. And a few years ago, I made a pitch to our editors to let me move back home. And Matt Storin, our editor, agreed. He thought that it would give the paper another dimension. And he told me, he says, in New England, we probably really know more about Europe than we know about the South. Go back down there and cover it like you're covering a foreign country. Well, you know, we really are, always have been sort of a foreign country. W.J. Cash was obsessive on the subject in his old classic, The Mind of the South. And Southerners tend to be very introspective, and we love to tell stories and write about our idiosyncrasies. And outsiders are fascinated by us. And Peter, I liked your book a lot, and you know, you're a Southerner. You may not have been born there, but you know, you understand this very well. Peter had in his book a line from Cash that I want to touch on briefly and expand on a little bit, and I'll be slightly a devil's advocate here. But Cash wrote in this book in, it was 39 that book came out, I don't know, 39, 40, it's over 50 years ago. Cash wrote, "The South is a tree with many age rings, with its limbs and trunk bent and twisted by all the winds of the years, but with its taproot in the Old South." And I think that for all of these claims down through the years of the New South, and I always thought Henry Grady started it, and I read the book and found out that we had boosters before Grady who were talking about the New South, and I get kind of weary about hearing about the New South, but I think basically we're still very much the Old South, and we're very resistant to change. You know, there obviously have been shifts in my lifetime. The greatest one is black enfranchisement, the fact that we've got more black public officials in our home state of Mississippi than any other state in the country. That's been the most profound change. All the white folks who once were Southern Democrats are now Republicans, but the voting and the ideology is still the same. You know, they still are, you know, hidebound conservatives. And for all this burst of New South governors in the 70s, you know, a couple of guys named Carter and Clinton came along, but really we've kind of reverted to form, you know, all deference to West Virginia. But in the Deep South, we now have what I call the 3F Club, and that's Fobb, Fordyce, and Foster. And these governors of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana are basically throwbacks to George Wallace, John Bell Williams, and Jimmy Davis, if you know your Southern history. And for all of our cries of being downtrodden and, you know, the beaten South, it's really a very powerful region politically. It's big, it's growing, it continues to send the same people back to Congress. We have seniority. The region is also incredibly homogeneous. If you take this arc that would go from, say, Northern Virginia to East Texas, and you have to lop off Florida because it's a foreign state in our foreign country. But you've got this incredible area where we all speak with the same accents. We basically have the same religious beliefs, and we have the same very conservative social mores. And I know in a place like New England, you got your special characteristics here, but New England's really very small. You got the Midwest, and a lot of wonderful people there, but it doesn't really have any character. And the South is really incredibly unique. We're rich with all our Gothic stories and our weird politics, and we still are rooted in the past. And the political scientists today are observing and in some cases lamenting the fact that Southerners are in control in Washington. But I would argue that for most of the century, Southerners have controlled Washington through the old seniority system, committee chairman. They've run Washington for years. I basically think that it's not so much the South has changed, although God knows we've changed on race, and that's been the greatest thing that's happened. But basically, we haven't changed, and the country's changed. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember the great Claude Pepper race in Florida, I guess about 35, 40 years ago, when he was harassed for being, all sorts of things, and the most loathsome word of all was applied. He was a liberal, and he got beat. And today, politicians all over the country are running from the word liberal. Nobody accepts the word liberal, with a few exceptions like Barney Frank or Ron Dellums or somebody like that. And it's this terrible word. In this state of Massachusetts, you've got a governor. If you throw out his positions on abortion and gay rights, he's really very conservative. You got a senator from New York who's more of a soul brother with Jesse Helms and with Fiorello LaGuardia. You got the big northern industrial states of Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, all with conservative governors. And the two great growth states, California and Texas, have conservative governors. And I have one other quote, and this is from a fellow named Chris Sullivan, who's president of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans in South Carolina. I was talking to him the other day. I was down doing yet another piece on the fight over the flag that still flies over the South Carolina Capitol. And Chris said to me, we lost the war. He's referring to the Civil War, obviously. He says, we felt we had the best argument, but we were brutally beaten. So the South has spent the last 130 years trying to win the war on other terms. Right now, I would have to agree that the South is winning because, like Faulkner said of Dixie, we endured.
Well, let me ask if any of you take exception to what Curtis had to say, and maybe we need to speak specifically to the issue of race, where Curtis and others have alluded to there's significant change, but where are we today, and is it any different in the South than it is elsewhere in the country?
I think Curtis is mostly right, and I think one of the things that's sort of most, I think, depressing about the racial debate in America today is the degree to which we still want to see it in these stereotypical, mythic terms of things that happen in the South. I mean, look at all these movies, one after another. Mississippi Burning and Ghost of Mississippi and Rosewood and A Time to Kill. And, it's sort of, again, this stereotypical civil rights landscape in which, evil is represented by pot-bellied Southern sheriffs and good is represented by sort of selfless black folk struggling to earn the right to vote or whatever. And, America has always used the South sort of as this sort of shadow theater in which we play out our most intense and convoluted dramas, particularly over race. I mean, we never really see the South. We sort of see kind of these two caricatures, either the sunny South or the savage South. And I think it's striking, at this point in history when race is so clearly, either the or one of the main dilemmas of the country, the degree to which it's still seen in these stereotypical, mythic, completely illusory terms of kind of the dilemma of the South. I mean, it's always, we have met the enemy and it is them. Well, it ain't them, it's us.
Mayor, at dinner you were speaking to this issue about the different approach the South took than the North. And it was...
Well, one of the things when you, in your book, I'd like to thank you for Issaquah County is in there, because I'm from Issaquah County. One of the things that, if you look at those counties in the book, these were some of the richest counties in the country at one point. And what was the economics? And I think that that's where we have to take a look at where's the economics and where's racism and how it got into that, or the color of black and white, and we still arguing over economics at this particular point. I'd say that one of the reasons why we had in this country you all call them riots, I call them uprisings. The uprising in the cities is because that the blacks had left the South and was told that it was better in the North and in the West, and they found out it wasn't so, that it was a serious problem because they became into areas, no economic base, and put into these high rises and rising houses, and they came from the land. You know, it was a different lie. And I said that the Southern whites, we always knew where we stood. One thing about it, in your book it kind of spells that out, that how the white Southern was, you know, and then how do we, is all of us getting to be South, you know, because I always thought all of us was South, you know, because that's what I always said. You know, I said, well, one thing about it, I always knew where I stood with the whites in the South, because that I know they would shoot you. I mean, there wasn't no question on it, and I knew that they would hang you, and these kind of things. So you take care of yourself, you know, of trying to get away from that. In some other parts, it was said that we all could be together, and we could, you know, what they call it, integrate by going into the restaurants or the stores and stuff together. And then it broke loose in the 60s and 70s, and we had these, it wasn't so. I think we have lived in a situation where the South is bringing out more of the truth of who we really are. And we is got problems in America around race. And now it's coming out in other little places, you know, the West and in the North and that kind of type thing. So your book, I think, will help us, you know, get further along and taking a look at ourselves of being who we really are. I am a true believer that you got to be whatever you are. If you're a racist, let us find out that's what you are, and let us deal with that. Let's get in there and see, can we work at that? But if you deny it, and I feel that our country has been in denial a lot about what was going on. The reason why that the South is politically strong, it's always been that way. Look back at your history. Senator Eastland was from our state. He went over and over and over and over and over and over again because there wasn't no blacks registered to vote. So, you know, they said, well, this is the first time we ever had that leadership? No, we've had it, but it comes under all kinds of different circumstances. And so now, the leadership is coming because the people said they believe in Republicans and they're going to be better and this is going to be right and so forth. And so we got another trend going. But I think we need to take a look at when we say these things and look underneath and see, you know, this is not the first time we had leadership that stays in the White House, that stays in Congress, is because that the people in the North or in the East or in the West is off on some other kind of causes and are not getting people out to register to vote and to vote. I claim that you all need to get the folks out to the polls. That's what needs to happen.
I don't know if the other three of you have any comments on that.
Curtis, one thing that I disagree with you on is the fact that you say the South really hasn't changed. I think the South has changed in one major way, because I think also the rest of the country's changed. And that is that if you go to the growing big cities in the South, Charlotte, Atlanta for two, you find people who really believe in their future and really believe that they can build great cities. They recognize their problems, but it's a totally different attitude than if you go to New York City or you go to Los Angeles, where people really don't believe that they can build better cities than they have today. And so I think that is one way it's different. And I agree with you that there's always been pretty good leadership in the South, because I think Mr. Washington and Mr. Jefferson would also say they didn't do too bad a job a few years ago.
Curtis, the only thing that I really disagree with what you said was we don't have an accent.
The rest of them do.
That's right.
Well, Governor, I would just respond on the thing about the cities. Is, you cited Charlotte and Atlanta. I know they are kind of the boom towns. But you go to the other southern capitals, whether it's a Columbia or Montgomery or Jackson or Little Rock, they haven't changed a hell of a lot from what they were, physically or demographically or anything in my lifetime. They're still fairly sleepy, conservative places. Charlotte is, kind of looks like Oz on the landscape of North Carolina, and Atlanta is totally another breed of cat.
Except all their economies have substantially improved in most of those places.
Well, I think, sure. Our economy is better than it used to be. We still, we lag behind. Peter talks about unionization or lack thereof down there. And the reason we've got industry is that we welcomed them down there with all sorts of tax incentives, and they exploited our labor for fairly well, and when they got tired of us, they moved to Mexico. And we really got no history of a labor movement other than in your state. Your state's one of the few that can be considered southern, where there's really any kind of organized labor movement. I think we're still exploited to a certain extent by industrialization. Everybody in the country is better off than we were 20 years ago, but it's all comparative, I think.
Yeah, but I think the governor is right in the sense that there clearly is this sense of optimism, this sense of the sense that the world is getting better in a lot of southern cities, and I think in the region as a whole. And I think that's a real part of the sort of, the dynamism that you see in places like not just Charlotte and Atlanta, but Nashville, kind of cities throughout the region. I think it is a fundamental difference, that you see in a lot of southern cities as opposed to some other parts of the country. I mean, again, the sense that things are getting better, the future looks brighter than the past, and both in terms of economics and in terms of race. I mean, I think one thing that is striking, and I don't know if you need to agree with me or not, but I do think in general race in the South in general these days plays out better than the rest of the country for
I
two
don't
reasons.
think question.
Yeah.
Race is the one area where we made progress.
We know where we stand.
Right, but not just in terms of the past, but in terms of the rest of the country. I mean, I think partly because of sort of the compulsive conviviality and amiability and focus on manners in the broadest sense in the South. I think it leavens life, including race, in ways that are not true in the rest of the country. And also, I think that Southerners kind of viscerally, in their bones, know that so much of their future is tied up with how they deal with race. And I think people in the rest of the country may know that intellectually, but I don't know if they know it viscerally the way Southerners do.
I didn't mean to yield the floor a minute ago. All these politicians jumped in there so quick. Interesting thing, Mayor, that you said that really struck me about the whole racial question is, as I was listening to you, something really struck a nerve. It's not just what happened in the South that was bad that Peter has depicted, and it's true. But it's not that we did it. Why did we do it? What caused people to do those kinds of things? And I think you see a much stronger effort in the South now to deal with the causes, what's creating those kinds of things. You and I are here, interestingly enough, kind of with the same philosophy. You said if you got the votes, you can win. I went into the North Carolina House in a distinct minority. I said, working on these issues is important. But until we get a majority in this House, our good ideas are not going to go very far. So I worked very hard, along with some others, and the national picture in '94 certainly impacted that. But I worked on recruiting people to run, helping them with issues. And we became the majority in the North Carolina House for the first time since Reconstruction. So I really identify with what you're saying. And essentially, that's where the answer is. If you have an idea, go to work on it.
Well, I think the idea is one of the things, the reason why we got as many blacks elected officials, even throughout the country, is that our issue is to make things better and certain kinds of freedoms. This, you know, when you talk about politics, I think they talks about us as, calls us politicians and think that's all we eat and sleep and live. Well, you can't eat and sleep and live without politics. I mean, politics is the base for our country. It is the base for what we do. Now, they say, well, business is this, and the economics and so forth. When it gets finished, it eases on back into politics. And so when we look at who we elect in this country, or what happens on the local level, people have to meet one another. The only way that we are getting along, as you have there, is because that we in the South have to face one another, because that vote is there. That vote is there. And that vote is there. And I continue to say that. And I say that this, if the country go to understanding that everybody's vote is neither black, nor white, nor green, or polka dot. It is a vote. And that's what I want myself, I feel that way, that I want everybody to go to understanding how important it is to go and vote and to be a part of a political process, and how it brings on all these other things that I call the others is just kind of camouflages over there. We call it economics, we call it this, we call it all these things. But when you get through with your economics, you got to figure out who's in charge. Well, if you don't have the right person there, you got a problem all over again. And so that's what I see. You know, even now when I look up and see Ford running when he had plenty of money, and a whole lot of other folks had plenty of money, so it wasn't economics on his part, it was the reason running, you know. He understood that politics is very important in this country. And I say that's the thing that's moving us in the South. And I thank you for your book, because it starts to awaken some more. Now, one of the parts in there is what's happening in the Mississippi Delta. We have the riverboats. And he talks about it in there. And you go in there and you sit down and you look. You don't see anybody mad with nobody. They sitting there, white and blacks and greens and polka dots, letting it roll, you know. And then they'll ask you, is you winning anything? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's what kind of camaraderie, what brings us together, you know, what making us talk? What is it? Our state didn't have any money, but the politics of the state, who was the vote? We had to vote whether we have it or whether we didn't. I'm a Christian, so we can say, well, it's sin and it's this and so forth and whatever. But I'm saying that all of this make us all talking. Even the Christians are standing over in the corner trying to debate, you know, what's happening to the money. You understand what I'm saying? So, but it's round to the politics. It comes right back to the politics. We look at what's happening in the South in terms of and somebody brought it up, you know, black and whites and dating one another and so forth and whatever. That's not the highlight right now, you know. in our state. And hopefully that we don't stir that back up again, because it's not needed. Another thing that came out was, if we look in your book, you know, you're talking about the economics and the boats and all those things. I laughed. I enjoyed that. But anyway, in my county, voted, a little small county, voted for riverboat and gambling. They asked me, I was mayor sitting there, and they says, do you think it's going to pass? I said, I don't think so, because we are Christians here. Them Christians, I don't know what happened to them. We are one of the first in the state that legally went and voted. You understand? But now it was the economics. But see, the vote had the power. That's what I'm trying to say. The vote had the power. And then Vicksburg didn't have it. I thought they was going to bring in all this Quinta County. The people in Vicksburg, and the preachers and everybody else was really good people, but they couldn't turn that around because the money started moving, and they was talking about coming to Vicksburg, and we opened up Vicksburg. It's Quinta County, a little bit little county, open up Vicksburg, y'all. You get the picture of what I'm saying with that vote. Then the next one on the other side of us was Washington County. So the vote went there. But they still was fighting it. What is they fighting? It's the vote. Whether it's right or wrong, it was the vote was there, was pulling it this way or that way, or the power of the people. And that's what, you know, that I enjoyed Dixie Rising. I was trying to figure out, is Newt on the side with, well, never mind. He's on one side.
Newt's on Newt's side.
But anyway, he's on his side. I looked here and I was trying to figure out, was that on the bottom? I was trying to figure out, who is that lady? Is that Marion Anderson? Fannie Lou Hamer.
I don't know if it's Mahalia Jackson or a generic gospel singer.
All right, then. I didn't know which one it was. Miss Hamer, Fannie Lou Hamer, put that down in your books, people. Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the greatest catalysts for change in this country. And she was from the Mississippi Delta. And she stood and asked the question, is this America? So I'm still asking that question. The South, or is this America?
Very well. Why don't we open it up at the moment to questions from our audience, and if you'll please identify yourself briefly and direct your questions. We have 2 microphones here on the floor. Direct your questions, if you wish, to one particular member of the panel. We won't ask every panelist to answer every question, but just simply those that are inspired to say something about it. And yes.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Ned Freeman. I'm a freshman at the college. You know, I've grown up in the South. I lived in North Carolina, in Alabama, and I live in Louisiana now. And you know, my whole family, everyone, all my ancestors have all been Democrats. I'm a Democrat, but it seems, I mean, it's obvious the Democratic Party is really struggling in the South. Like in Alabama, Jim Folsom, who was a moderate conservative governor, couldn't get reelected after he boosted the economy with bringing Mercedes in and all that. I mean, and Bill Clinton didn't have a chance in Mississippi and Alabama. And across the South, you know, the Democratic Party seems to be fading away because it seems like it's becoming the party of the blacks and the views of whites. And we have 3 politicians up here who have vastly different perspectives. I just want to see what all of you have to say about the future of the Democratic Party in the South. If it is going to continue to the trend's going to continue where whites switch over to the Republican Party, or if there is some sort of strategy to bring whites back into the Democratic Party.
I'd like to say, you know, in recent years, there's sort of been 2 models, I guess, for white Southern Democrats. And one is kind of the Jim Hunt, Bill Clinton, you know, sort of moderate Southern Democrats who basically get elected by a coalition of blacks and whites. You know, another model is sort of, Curtis mentioned a bunch of them, Kirk Fordyce and Newt Gingrich, basically white Southerners who get elected just with white votes. And clearly that is the model that for now is ascendant. And you know, we have 3 politicians here. You know, I think what we've heard about Southern politics is probably about as kind as it could be. I mean, I think the political tradition in the South has had its strengths at times, but has also often been characterized by kind of the worst kind of demagoguery and the worst kind of sort of cheap uses of race and sort of other symbol-laden values issues in a way that basically I think what Lee Atwater's genius was taking a lot of the worst elements of the Southern political tradition and making them national. And I think it's very hard at this point to see a lot of really positive trends in terms of biracial politics in the South. It may make a resurgence. It's certainly not ascendant now.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it never was. It was always the debate when we challenged the Democratic Party throughout the South. Mississippi was the first one to challenge at the Democratic Party in 1964, and then other groups came from Alabama, North Carolina, and so on to challenge the way that they seat the delegates. Then that's when the breakdown started, into coming out of what they call a conservative. I hate that use that word that way because it says that conservatives are mean and nasty and whatever. I'm conservative with my money, so I just I don't think it's all mean and nasty, but we have to figure out why people run from party to party. And it is slogans and different things. And at this one time in history, the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln. And he was the one that signed the piece of paper saying that the slaves was freed. So everybody got to be a Democrat, quote. So now we switch this way. But I'm just waiting until the penguin stops somewhere. It's just swinging, and we still have the race question, and it comes up now. It says that we're dealing with morals. That's the group calls itself the religious right, and then they calls another group the leftists and the liberals and so forth, and we just name calling one another, and that's what I see that's happening in the South. Because women and blacks became into the Democratic Party was one of the pieces. Now, the Republicans has got to come up with something, and that is they got to get some women and a few more blacks and sprinkle them around too, because in this last election it didn't do too well, and that's what I see.
My sense of that is, in order for this thing to become more clear about which party you're going after, the two parties, as they now exist, are going to have to decide who they are. And that's reflected in their platform. And I think as each party rallies or disperses around its platform, then it's going to be much easier for the voting public to decide which identity they want. It's kind of a situation in my mind, is the party through the platform going to let people decide, or is the party going to continue, whether it's Republican or Democrat, to be very fuzzy, very ill-defined, but as the pollsters and the political consultants tell you, well, we've got to chase this mythical center, which will give us a mythical coalition, which will give us that one more vote that we need in the next election. So to me, it's, are we going to identify ourselves and pursue our goals and our ideals, whichever they may be, or are we going to continue to go the route of the professional pollster and consultant and let them define who we are and who we want to be and what it is that we're looking after? It's a searching after.
Curtis, yeah.
Just briefly comment that the realignment that's taken place down there is largely along racial lines. And you said you're from Louisiana. I think Louisiana is a good case in point. That is, at this point, probably the most reliable Democratic state in the South. And it's reliably Democratic.
Besides West Virginia.
Huh?
Besides West Virginia.
Well, if West Virginia is Southern, they were a border state. They weren't part of the good old late Confederacy. But I was asking the governor earlier, what's the secret? What do you use in your water to get all the Democrats elected there? But the secret in Louisiana, and it could be in other places, is the black vote. Because in Louisiana, they have a tradition of voting. They were voting there in large measures before the Voting Rights Act. And there was not that old tradition of voting in the other southern states where you have big concentrations of black, like Mississippi, which has the highest, and yet you have a real reactionary Republican governor. And until you get enough blacks registered and voting, it's the very point that I think you're making, there's not going to be a change for the foreseeable future. I think, you know, that the Republicans have the upper hand down there because there's not enough of the blacks voting, assuming they're going to vote Democratic, and the Democrats continue to be the most attractive party.
Yeah. My name is John Frank, and I'm here at the Kennedy School. Tonight, it was implicitly and explicitly mentioned the Civil War, and that kind of jumped out at me, especially Curtis mentioning it a couple of times. And I was wondering if the Civil War is still a great part of the Southern psyche, because I don't feel that it is any part of the Northern psyche.
You want me to handle it? Unquestionably.
I'll do it first. Sure, absolutely. Well, you know, there's sort of
Peter's
the old,
got a whole chapter about it.
There's the old adage that the losers always remember. And, you know, a huge amount of the South's identity has been shaped by, you know, sort of the various psychic needs to sort of, you know, win in the peace what it lost in the war. But it's astonishing how much in Southern life the Civil War is still a part of life. And you start off with all these sort of endless flaps over the Confederate flag, or the state song of Virginia, or the state song of Florida, or the Confederate emblem on the Maryland license plate. But there's this huge resurgence of all these sort of neo-Confederate groups. And I think part of it has to do with the degree to which, you know, so much of race in America has always played out, you know, both in real and illusory ways symbolically in the South. And, you know, what's really going on is sort of this struggle to create a genuinely biracial identity for the region. I mean, all this imagery from the past is the imagery of the white South. And, you know, the real struggle is sort of to try to come up with a shared identity that blacks and whites can buy into. And it's incredibly difficult to do. There was a great op-ed piece in the New York Times a few days ago by the historian Eric Foner. I don't know if many of you saw it. But basically, his point was that, you know, I mean, you know, there's sort of a lot of liberals take the tack that sort of all these emblems of the Confederacy are inherently racist and evil, and the way to get past them is to sort of, you know, eradicate them and move on. And Foner's piece was, well, you know, this is the South's history and it should be respected. The trouble with the South's history is not that, you know, it's incomplete. I mean, instead of eradicating the white South, there should be ways to sort of acknowledge, celebrate, and make use of the black South symbolically. And it's a hard struggle, but I think that's essentially what all these fights are. And it's the way in which, you know, on the one hand, it's nutty beyond belief that 130 years after the Civil War, we're still fighting over this stuff. But another way, I think it's part of the way that sort of the South's racial history really is the nation's in kind of its boldest, brightest, most memorable, sometimes most horrific forms.
Hi, my name's Eric Rosbach. I'm a 1L at the law school, and I'm from Houston, Texas. And my question actually goes to sort of a personal feeling that I've had, in that I can, my mother's whole side of the family is from Tennessee way back, and then she grew up in Dallas, in a very segregated Dallas. She almost never had to deal with people of any other race but white until there was desegregation and essentially the racial changes during the 1960s. I had a totally different upbringing in that I went to public schools in Houston. They were totally integrated, and just the whole way that I was taught was totally different. I mean, she was taught essentially that the South was the right side in the Civil War in her textbooks. And I was taught that the North was the right side, you know, the side that should have won the Civil War in the textbooks. And I guess my question is there a big generation gap in the South, or is it just me and my mom that have a different opinion?
I don't want to do all the talking here.
Well, I think with age, some of the sensitivity to the issues that have been raised here do go away. It's probably good. One thing that comes to my mind, and this is an intimate gathering, kind of like Connie Chun, I don't want you all to let this get out, but there are a lot of good black candidates. Maybe not enough, but a lot of good black candidates getting elected in the South because they're good candidates. Now, folks haven't figured that out, in my opinion. They think they're still getting elected because of racial gerrymandering, because they're black. They're getting elected because they're good candidates. We can build on that. I've seen the race card played in my own political experience recently, and we talked about that at lunch today in another setting, but I didn't have a chance to bring this up. I saw two good black candidates, one for county commissioner and one for state senate, in this last election, lose because of race. And they were trapped. They were Republicans, which is neither good nor bad. It's just a fact. And the trap that was laid for them was in a large public meeting. They were asked, do you support the Republican platform? The answer was yes. Well, does that mean that you support Jesse Helms? Yes, we do. That, as a race card, defeated two excellent candidates. And that's not good. And what I'm saying is, because good black candidates are getting elected on their merits, that kind of thing is going to, in the short run, maybe the long run, work against people who are manipulating elections, chasing these coalitions, who are not dealing with issues, who are not dealing with honesty. That's one of the things that I see happening in the South that I think is positive, and as more people, particularly the younger generation, which is your question, get involved because they want to be there, because they see something to believe in and to work for, then good things are going to build on good things.
I'd just like to say, you know, we talking about the 130-year question. I think we studied Bill on this over and over again because that's what you were taught. And the history of this country, a lot of things was wrong that they taught. And we didn't even get it, you know, in some of the schools, because I went to segregated schools, because I'm of that age. And don't ask me until we by ourselves what age that is. But anyway, we wasn't taught anything that we ever done. You know, it wasn't anything there that blacks was doing or anything. So what I see, and I'm not trying to cover it up, is that we have an uneducated America, and a lot of it is the South was just taken on and over and over and over again, is because of the economics that was tied to slavery, and the fight. They lost their position as the people in the South, you know, way of life. And I don't know whether you ever seen this piece that they done on America. And one of our states was picked up, and we talked about a way of life. It was a way of life. And that's what people were taught. It's been a way of life. And they hangs on to something that meant something. And then we ends up with people who erratic and crazy and setting up all these other little groups now, and hate groups and so forth, is calling it that they are traditionally holding the South. But the South started off with people in New England sold the slaves to the people in the South. And maybe somebody need to sit down and start to get that out to folks, you know, that it was because of your economics. And the way to keep these people down is to not let them become voters, and not let them become registered voters, and not let them participate, because then that do something with your economics. And that's what I think that we all got bogged around. And we keep saying that over and over again. That a lot of the people, whites in my community and others, sits and says, well, I just can't hardly make it. But, you know, I have to give it to you. You is a good mayor, you know. And I'm saying people who are my age and older, that just finally have to say it, you know, that they couldn't even say it because they was afraid. There are people, see, I really feel that the Klans was more frightening to white people. And I know they was frightening to us, but they was truly frightening to white people because if you was a part of it, if you looked like you was a sympathizer or anything, you got wiped out. I had what we call, like we talk about the white folks saying they have some good black folks. Well, we had some good white folks, you know, that did things, you know what I mean, that let us know when you all was coming. You understand what I'm saying? That let us know that when I would go to jail, you know, one time I was arrested every day for 30 days, rest straight, you know, and I wasn't doing nothing, trying to get people registered to vote, but they said it was against the law. State legislature said it was against the law, put us in jail. The law was wrong. So I say that, you know, it's a lot of things that's wrong. It's just wrong. But a lot of the white people in my state kept me alive. Because they would tell the head of my organization that I was in jail. And I might have been dead just like the other three that got killed. So I never talk about it. Because I don't want nobody to ever take away their economic development, you understand? Because that they'd have took away their economic development, they would have called their children nigger lovers, they went after these people in all kinds of ways. So I think we have to look at the deepness of this and what really has happened in the South and into America. If you associate with blacks, you was labored. And you know, they would cut you off and you couldn't become a part. People was more, I said, white people are more afraid than black people were in the South because they didn't want to be a part of nothing that would cut off their livelihood. And that has happened in communities. I was born in the Mississippi Delta, and I know the Delta, and it was an aristocrat place. But everybody knew everybody. All the whites knew everybody, and we know all the whites. But they was all afraid of one another. And they didn't want to be identified with the wrong color.
My name is John Bunton, and I'm from Greenville, Mississippi. I'd like to address this question primarily, though not exclusively, to the journalist. And my question is, to what extent to what, if any extent, is it a good thing that the country is becoming more Southern? I mean, just in the interest of being contentious, you could argue that there was a long and important period in American history from the 1870s until the Great Depression, when much of what constitutes modern America was built, in which the South was silent politically. To what extent what should non-Southerners expect from a more Southern nation? And to what extent do you all think that's a good thing?
Good question.
I'll start. I think there's a lot of wonderful aspects of the South. And I think one of the tragedies of Southern life is often that the bad aspects of the South travel faster and better than the good ones. So I think a lot of what the South is exporting politically is toxic. I mean, I think it's a lot of the racial politics, a lot of sort of the cheap, symbolic, values-laden, sort of the meanness in a lot of American politics, I think, it comes from the worst of the Southern tradition. I think, in terms of, I think what's appealing about the South is the degree to which, it's funny, at the end of a century is often a time of nostalgia. And I think the South in lots of ways represents a lot of good things in America's past in terms of a sense of community, sense of shared values, religion. I think the South in lots of ways does speak to a lot of the sort of the better, more enduring rural values from the country's past. And I think that those are things that make the South very appealing and are part of the reason why so many people are moving there. But those are awfully hard to export. And you look at a guy like Jimmy Carter, who I think basically did sum up a lot of the really best, even spiritual values of the South. But I think he never was able to translate that nationally. And I think other people, Lee Atwater, Newt Gingrich, I think have managed to export a lot of the less palatable aspects of the South's past and present. And I think what's really intriguing is to see whether the South can do as good a job of exporting its better aspects as it does its worser ones. Curtis?
I guess I'll just say briefly, John, did you say Greenville or Greenwood?
Greenville, not
Greenville,
Greenwood.
okay. I was born in Greenville, so myself. And we're 3 of us from the Mississippi Delta here.
44 miles from.
That's right. Just one personal vignette. After I moved back, I left the South with a great deal of anger in '69. It had been a bad period for a lot of us, not nearly as bad for me as it was for somebody like Unita Blackwell. But I said, I'm never coming back down here. And eventually, I began going back and was drawn back to it. And I truly, I love the region. And I had moved back, and I was having dinner in Jackson one night with a bunch of people. Among them was Willie Morris, another guy who wrote the great book North Toward Home, and moved back after 12 or 15 years in New York. And Willie said to me, "Why did you come back?" And I thought just very briefly, and I said, and it's just so very true, I said, people are kinder here. And I think Southern people are much kinder. I've lived a number of years up here and in Washington and overseas, and the kindest people I've ever, for all of our meanness in politics, the kindest people I've ever encountered are Southerners. I don't know whether that's something we can export, but I found there was a spiritual coldness in New England. And God knows, we got a lot of spirit down there, and some of it's malevolent, but I think it's a great, wonderful place to live. There's a lot of ferment.
Comment that I would make connection with what you were saying. In your book, you point out that George Wallace, a Southern Democrat, was the person who first came up with the items that ended up in the Contract for America. Then Newt Gingrich sort of patented it or used it in that election process. And now Bill Clinton and Jim Hunt have taken it back. So it's kind of an interesting metamorphosis of this particular idea of states' rights and where it came from. I don't think that this exportation of values, if I heard you say it right, is necessarily a false sense of values. In some cases, it's being done for political purposes. In other cases, a lot of the people that I know that I met through my campaign, those values, and you alluded to it, are very important to them. These are people who work hard, they care about their children, they care about education, they care about their community, and I think it's very real. So, again, how do you sift through all this and take the positive part and build on it? But this values thing is not an artificial thing with the majority of people that I know.
We just have a few more minutes. Let's try to get the last questioners in here.
Okay. My name is Andrew Zanton. I'm a freelance writer, and I've just finished helping the civil rights leader Charles Evers with his memoirs. I wanted to ask each of the 5 panelists if you could briefly identify the happiest day of your professional life and why.
Can you do that briefly? Can you figure that out quickly?
The happiest day of my professional life is the day that I incorporated the town that I live in, and I wasn't able to vote at one time in that same place. And I became Mississippi's first black woman mayor. I was a happy person.
Anybody else?
It takes a lot of thought.
No, I think I have mine. I left journalism for 2 years. I was a congressional fellow and worked on Capitol Hill, and was a legislative aide or whatever. But I was at heart a journalist, and I finally got a job again with the paper in Wilmington Delaware, and I had 2 or 3 alumni from the Wilmington News Journal in the room. And the first story I did was, you know, the tippy little story as a press conference by Bill Roth or something. But for the first time, I'd written a story again. I saw it appeared on page 49, but no matter, it just gave me such a thrill to be back in journalism again.
I don't know if this is much of an answer. I don't know if this is really the happiest moment of my professional life, but the nice thing about writing a book for me was doing the acknowledgments, to have this opportunity in print to sort of thank all these people that helped you in your career, with your life, that kind of thing. And it's by doing the book, you know, almost from the start, I look forward to being finished to be able to write the acknowledgments and thank people.
My happiest moment was when we built a lot of new schools, and to see communities come in there that had a sense of pride about what they were doing for the first time.
It's a very difficult question. I guess this is not as deep a response. It's kind of 2 things, but the one, to stick to one, I went through a 14, 15-month campaign against an opponent that I had a hard time touching. And 10 days before the election, there was a debate. And there was a debate about issues, and who I was, who I wanted you to know me as. And the same ground rules held for him. And the first 30 minutes was the press asking us questions, which we responded to, and the last 30 was us asking questions of each other. And I felt like, win or lose, that was my opportunity to say in a straightforward manner what the campaign was about, what the issues were. So that's more of a technical kind of thing, but there's so many things in your life and in a campaign based on what we're talking about here. I think that's a big part of the mayor, and all of us are saying, how do we get campaigns and politics on issues and away from other things?
Well, thank you, all of you.
Yes. Oh, excuse me, I bounced, I didn't see you over there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a sophomore in the college, and I'm from Boston. The only place I've ever been in the South is actually Disney World, so, but anyway, that's another story. I want to shift the focus for a minute and address the issue of gender in the South. And I was wondering if you could talk about the role of women in Southern politics and the role of women in general, and how the Southern woman has changed.
I'd like to start on that. That's something that happened, or part of the North Carolina legislature that I'm proud to be a part of. And when I was serving there, 34% of the delegation on the Republican side were women. And these were women who had established their place in politics through professional careers, education, a number of different things. And a lot of these same women were involved in our campaign effort. And I think this was something that changed my ideas about women's role in politics and in business. And it was a very big part of our whole effort in politics. And one quick reference back to this gentleman's question, I get the most interesting point. When I, as a conservative, ran against my opponent in the press as a conservative, all of a sudden they found out I was coming to Harvard. And, oh, he can't be possibly as conservative as we painted him. He's going to Harvard.
Women in the South, we are waking up in terms of it was not ladylike to be in those things, you know. So I was an organizer. So I organized the men. But one day they looked around and told me that you need to run, because they'd run out of people to run. And so they told me to run for justice of peace. So I had to come up with a slogan. And I said, you know, Lord knows I need some justice and sure do need some peace. And I feel that women have a struggle in all over the country in what our roles are. But in the South, it just wasn't ladylike to run and do all those things. And I ran for Congress. 7 men was out there running. I think it was 3 blacks and 4 whites, and I was just running and enjoying myself, and come in 4th, by the way, in a district that never would have anybody thought, which is the 2nd Congressional District, which is the Mississippi Delta. in Mississippi. We have a lot to overcome, not only race, but gender, and a whole lot of other things.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank our panelists and thank you for being here tonight. Thank you.
One of these days we'll each. Three alumni? Have you met my wife? Yeah. Oh, I never have. No. It's nice to.